Thank you, guys. This is one of my favorite presentations that I give. And for those of you who heard Billy Tarasio's prezo earlier today, this is a slightly different take on that. But what we're going to do is cover a couple of things. Number one, the content that lawyers can actually use to engage with the local community. And number two, there's a 12-step process that I've built that walks through how to go about doing this. And my objective here, and we're going to come back to this, I literally used this slide at the beginning and the end. I want to talk about how you can create a bunch of referrals, right? How you can turn your local city into kind of more than brand awareness, but actual brand affinity. Like, I like these guys. And as lawyers, if you can flip the script of I hate lawyers to I like this lawyer, you win. And we're going to show a couple of examples of how this has been done. This is me. It's boring. We'll get past the bio of this. Although if you want some fun, check out Zippy the Chicken. You can Google Zippy the Chicken and hear about his adventures or her adventures. Okay, this is entitled Dark Social, and most people start with, what do you mean by dark social? Dark social was first coined by Alex Madrigal in 2012 in an article in The Atlantic. I am a long-term digital marketing dude, starting in legal back in 2006. And my entire career, what we have done is we've created really, really efficient reporting systems. So I know if you click on this thing, you land on this page on my website, you use a tracking number to dial in, we then turn that into a record in your CRM system, and then we can determine whether or not you turn into a client. And that is a great model for actually tracking whether or not your pay-per-click, your LSAs are working. But in dark social, the whole point of dark social is you can't track a lot of this stuff. There's a lot of stuff that's happening that you can't track. You can't track that someone listened to a podcast. You can't track that you guys were sitting here in this conference listening to Conrad talk about this. There's a lot of stuff that you can't actually track. And so the objective here is to understand those things that generate referral sources that you can do in your community and amplify through the web that are then going to turn into clients that you can't track. Okay, and so it's been really difficult for me as kind of this MBA data person to live with this. But this is an example. Anyone know Morris Lilienthal? I'm wondering if anyone Huntsville, Alabama. Yeah, we got a couple of people in the house. Okay, Morris Lilienthal nails dark social, and he's been doing it for years and years and years. This is an example of the Mo Show. What he's doing, he's a PI lawyer. We're going to come back to why this is important. He's a PI lawyer who has this little show that he does, and he's invited 3 head coaches of youth football programs in the Huntsville, Alabama area to talk about how we over-push kids in high school sports. Okay? This is dark social, and we're going to come back to this because this is genius. And I'm going to explain to you why this works so well. My goal is by the end of this session, you're like, oh, this is why this little slide here is so genius. We're going to go into that. Now, traditionally, agencies, we generate leads, right? And then we generate consults and clients, and we can track all of this stuff, and we can build all these funnels. But dark social becomes different because you can't track it. You don't need to push all of this stuff. You don't need to learn all these. But these are all examples of these things that you can do that are not trackable, right? There's nothing I can do to know that these things are working. There's nothing I can do to automatically say, hey, this, Mary was at the conference that Cleo put on and heard Conrad, and 2 years later she's calling Conrad, right? Maybe she saw some ads after that. It's really, really difficult. So here's some examples of what this looks like. In real life, this is an example. If you listen to the LHLM podcast, you'll know we talk about this way too frequently. But this is Ken Levinson, Jay Stephanie out of Chicago. They are PI lawyers in Chicago. They like food. And food's going to come up again and again as we talk today. But they like food and they like Chicago. And so what they have done is they have profiled locally owned restaurants in Chicago for years. Okay? For absolutely years and years and years. And so every time they go out to a restaurant, they take a picture and they share it on social. And check out what else they're doing here. They're tagging Angelo. This is Angelo's restaurant. What happens when they tag Angelo? Angelo's like, great, let me amplify this message because here's someone who's really happy about my restaurant, and I'm going to share that out. They're turning Angelo into their marketing department, and they've done this over and over again. So now people who are really into food in Chicago know these guys, right? And they like these guys because they're into the same thing that I like, right? And they're promoting these little restaurants, great. And the other thing that they're doing is this is on YouTube, it's on Twitter, it's on Facebook. They're taking a single piece of content, replicating it on multiple different channels, right? So now they're building affinity across multiple channels. And by the way, I want to be really clear on this. You do not need to boil the ocean. You don't have to be everywhere. Okay? But when you are creating content, it's easy to repurpose that content. Okay. Different guy, Dean Blashford in Ottawa. Dean Blashford is a tax attorney. He does very, very esoteric tax work. His clients are people who work in accounting firms. He moves to Ottawa. He knows nobody in Ottawa. What he does is he organizes a softball game for people who work at the 4 major accounting firms in Ottawa. And it's a charity. He's been doing this for 4 years. His phone, he is so busy because he's done an amazing job of finding a really, really small target and doing a great job with them in the community with something that they're really excited about. And he keeps making the softball game bigger and better. Okay? So this is genius. It's community engagement, but we're going to talk about how do you amplify this message with digital. Okay, different dude, Josh Hodges, one of the smartest guys I know in legal. He runs what was a small firm in the outskirts of Cincinnati. And what he has done, this is Hodges on TikTok. You can see he's kind of an aw shucks dude, right? He's not in big suits, but he's profiling local businesses, local buildings, local bridges, local people all the time on TikTok. And he's had to hire lawyers because of this following. Now, I want to be really clear with Josh. Josh does not have a massive following, but he has a massive following in these small towns outside of Cincinnati. He owns that market. And everyone loves him because what does he do? He promotes their little place in the world. Okay, so those are examples of dark social. Engagement in the community amplified by the web. Okay, it's not that hard of a concept, but it's actually really difficult to execute on because it takes a lot of time. Okay, and most of you, we heard Billy earlier, someone asked Billy, like, how much do you spend on this? I think the answer was about a day a week. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of money. Time is money, right? So that's 20% of your money put into marketing. This takes a lot of time, okay? So most of you are not going to jump into this. And I'm going to try and discourage you from jumping into it because it can be so easy to fail. Okay, this is the 12-step process, and I added number 13 because it's an SEO thing that you should all know about. No need to look at this. All the next slides are each of these points. So this is a content flywheel. You need to generate content and content and content and community and community and community. And nothing really happens until that flywheel gets going. And so you were talking about 12 months before you can expect this thing to be self-generating. You have to work really hard at it, right? So you have to build content and you have to push out content on the regular. And the regular is not once a week. It is at least once a day. Okay, and you have to understand how the algorithms work. So for example, LinkedIn, you post more than once a day on LinkedIn and they start shutting you down, right? So it's the different channels have different algos that drive them. Okay, the problem with legal is that no one wants to be social about their legal problems, right? No, there's not people who like getting into a car accident, right? So no one wants to be really social about their legal problems. And so I have a very, very strong bias. Billy actually gave a great example of where it did work, where there's a sense of community among people who want to deal with going through the divorce process, and they do want to share. That's great. I get that. Most of you, it's much more difficult. Most people do not want to deal with their legal issues in a social, public-facing manner. Right? You know this. And I've been link building for lawyers forever. Like, people just want to keep, this is like sex and religion and politics. It's kept to yourself, right? Most of the time. So what you need to do is come up with what are things that people do care about, right? It's not about legal content. No one wants to listen to your podcast about the 7 things about tax law, right? It's just dull. So come up with things that people are interested in. Come up with things that you are interested in. Repurpose and reformat what you're doing. So when you generate content, so I can use this as an example. This talk, it's being videotaped, it's audio. There's a podcast in here. There's clips in here. There's reels in here. I could turn this into probably 5 hours of content in different formats, and I can push it out on the different channels. Okay, so repurpose and reformat. Now, I said this before, you do not have to boil the ocean, and you don't have to be on all of the channels. Remember, how many of you guys got really excited about Threads, right? And that lasted for like a week. Okay, so you can go crazy chasing the newest shiny object. You don't have to be everywhere, but you do need to think about where your audience is. And you do need to get that content in front of that audience. So I use Blatchford as an example. He's not on Facebook. He's the tax dude in Ottawa. He's all over LinkedIn though. All over LinkedIn, because that's where his audience is, right? So taking content, different formats, different mediums, different channels, and pushing it out is super, super effective. Okay, leverage other people's networks. This is really important, and it is missed by social media people and agencies all the time. Most of the time we talk about creating content. Most of what I've talked about here is about creating content. But you have to Pareto this, and you have to realize your job is not to generate content. Most of the success in here is built on content distribution, right? And so remember that Morris Lilienthal post where he had tagged the guy, right? That guy, the owner of that restaurant, is going to broadcast his message to people who are interested in his restaurant, right? So now Ken Levinson's like, hey, great. I like this restaurant. The restaurant owner's like, hey, here's a guy who likes this restaurant. Now I'm using that person to leverage the other network. One of the classic examples of this is podcasts. Interview people that you actually want to do business with, who will amplify your message, right? It's so much easier with podcasts specifically, but this is an extreme example. It's so much easier to be a guest on a podcast that already has a listenership than to create your own podcast. Okay, because you're not going to do it. 84% of podcasts fail in the first 6 months. Okay, and you guys are doing legal. You guys want to know a legal podcast? It's probably higher than 84%, right? So go out and find people who are already doing this. Leverage their reach, right? Leverage their reach, because that's the whole point of this, is amplifying a message through technology. Creating that community, it takes time. It's hard. Okay? This is not about you. So it's not about my law firm. There was a question about calls to action in social. My answer to that is I would never have a call to action other than let's continue to engage on social, right? You guys have all read this stuff, like the SEO written practice area pages that are like, if you've been in a car accident, like, you think your people really don't know that they've just read a page about car accident lawyer and they're like at the bottom, they're like, oh, I was in a car accident. Maybe I should call them, right? It's not about you. It's about them. And you will do so much. I just did a second taping of Michael Mogul at Crisp's podcast, okay? And one of the things that they do an amazing job that no one ever sees is in the post-production, they edit it, and they're going to make me and Guy, we did this kind of dual interview with Michael. Michael's rarely talking. His job is to draw us out, and so we look amazing, right? And for some people, that's harder than others, but it's all about the guest. It's all about the other person. And you know this. Like if you had good parents, you know this, right? If you're lawyers, you learn how to ask questions about people, right? So it's not about you. All right. This is difficult if you are the marketing person in a firm. This is very hard to outsource, downsource to Joe the intern, especially if your firm is built around that person. And it really requires, most of the time, it really requires engagement and a lot of time. A day a week of the most expensive person in your firm. That's a lot of time. You're not going to do this, right? And the reason for this is simple. Most firms will have that enigmatic figurehead. Most firms, you got the name on the door, that kind of stuff. And most firms, it's easier to market socially a person than it is a company, right? That's why companies have spokespeople, right? Because it's easier to embrace the personality when you're talking about a brand and actually build affinity for that person than it is this law firm. It's especially true in legal. So you need to get the enigmatic figurehead of the firm involved in this. And there was a great answer earlier on the question like, hey, I can't get some of my lawyers into it. If you're not into it, and if that enigmatic figurehead is not into actually taking the time to do this, find a different channel. Go blow a bunch of money on pay-per-click, right? And I don't even mean pay-per-click works. SEO works. All these things work. In order to make this work, you really, really need to have your figurehead of your firm be really deeply involved on the day-to-day. And it is it takes a bunch of time. Speaking of time, there's two elements to time. I really think that you're looking about a day a week to make this work in order to generate enough content. And the algorithms are continuing to think through like who's posting on the regular, who's posting on the regular. What I like to do, what I'd recommend people to do is get a backlog of content. Have 100 videos that are ready to go at any given time. So when you don't feel like it, or you can't come up with any ideas, or you're in the Bahamas or whatever it might be, your content is still pumping out there. But I would really set a goal of having a backlog of content that you can have someone either preloaded or ready to go, right? It takes time. It takes a long time. It takes a long time. Building relationships, getting known in the community, having the algorithms recognize who you are and that people actually care about following you, it takes a very, very long time. So if you're not going to do this for 12 months, don't bother. People talk to me about like, oh, I want to start a podcast and do, what should I do? And the answer to, I want to start a podcast, what should I do, is go record and distribute 100 podcasts and then come back to me and let's talk about it, right? Because without doing that for 12 months, without recording 100 podcasts, you haven't learned anything. You don't have a community. You don't know what works and you don't know what doesn't work. Okay, so this really, you need to get into this or not at all. Okay, I talked about attribution modeling. This is the most boring slide that we've got. It's also the most important. So we heard about Clio Grow earlier today, right? Great. So they finally made some changes to get Clio Grow integrating with Clio Manage, which is great. Good step. Clio Grow, one of the things that you can do is you can bring in marketing channel data so you know why the phone rang or the form fill was filled out or the text or the chat, right? And so you can automate that process to get that in there. And that's really good for those channels that are direct response. Pay-per-click, LSAs, for example, right? Great channels. But you should also know, the whole point of dark social is we don't actually know where people came from. So from an attribution perspective in your intake management system, I want to have two different source fields. One of them is automatically generated. And that will give you typically the last click attribution, which means that if someone heard the podcast and heard the podcast and heard the podcast and heard the podcast and then did a branded query for your firm and then clicked on the Google ad that has your brand on it, the attribution modeling thinks that's a pay-per-click success. It's not. It's not at all. Right? It's from the podcast. So you have to ask people. And I like to ask people like this. I don't like, where did you hear about us? I like this question because it's very open and it puts you in a very positive light. Hey, listen, people in Cincinnati, we have a pretty good reputation here and I like to send a thank you gift when people refer us a case. Is there anyone I should be sending a thank you gift to? Right? And by the way, you should also send those thank you gifts. But what you're really trying to open up here with a very open-ended question is, how did you hear about us? Right? And you'll start to hear things. The problem is when you do this, and I have an MBA, so we like drawing these pretty graphs and making things very simple. You will have conflicting information in your content management system about why people are calling you, why people are hiring you. You will have conflicting information, okay? And that's fine. Going through the process, and the person at your agency, at your firm, who has the authority to make changes needs to go through this process and understand what's working, right? And what you'll typically find, this final source, it's really important when you say, hey, is there anyone I send a thank you note to, that this is a free form process. You don't want to guide them anywhere because you want to hear what they have to say. And ideally, you're capturing that in here. You'll start to learn so much about what works for your marketing. And the other thing that you'll start to put together is that the 1 + 1 + 1 = 7. These things all work together. And they work better when they're all working, right? And if you just do one thing, it doesn't work as well. But your pay-per-click, let me give you an example of how this works and why it's so important to do this. You're running a pay-per-click campaign. First of all, you need to know if it's a branded query or a non-branded query, right? Second of all, you need to know that if you have brand affinity, people really like who you are, they're more likely to click on your brand, your ad, right? Because they recognize, oh, that's the guy who's always shows up at the softball games, right? They're more likely to click on your ad. Because they're more likely to click on your ad, Google sees that your click-through rate is high, which means your quality score is high, which means your bidding needs to be lower in order to capture all of those clicks. These things all work together, and it's pretty amazing when it happens. Okay, positioning. I talked about not doing this about the law, not building content around the law because no one wants to talk about the law in general. But that doesn't mean you can't talk about things that are genuinely important to you or that really tie deeply into the positioning of your firm. 2 women out of Sarasota, Florida, doing PI, okay? Their entire branding is around supporting women. It's great. This is easy. The content that they build, we're doing interviews of local women who have started businesses. We're doing interviews of the mayor, who happens to be a woman. We're doing our scholarship around women, right? We're going to talk about things that are important to women, and we're going to go deep into our community and profile women. It's so easy. You want to build affinity among a target audience that you are genuinely into? It's easy. Now, the hard part is the time. These concepts are not that hard. Everyone is into something. All of you have something that you're deeply interested in. And instead of boiling the Sarasota market, they're just targeting people who are really into supporting women and girls, right? And by the way, there's lots of you who fall into that category. You guys know Ben Glass? Ben Glass fans in the house? Really? No one? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Is that Chris Anderson? All right. Ben Glass, great law firm, right? Does a great job. Ben has been, and he is, I'm not going to guess how old he is on camera, but he is a lot older than I am. He's into being nice to soccer referees. All of his content is around don't bully the soccer referees, and he's still refereeing soccer. This is his personal passion, right? Most of you who have kids have sat on the side of a soccer field, right? It's so easy. Like these are things that like everyone has something, and it's really easy to fall into that. Okay. Make it local. Most of you have practices that are within 50 miles of where your office is, right? And COVID's made this kind of weird, and there's like all sorts of issues around this. But it is so easy to make this about local, right? I'm supporting my city. I'm supporting my town. Josh Hodges, like that's what he's doing. He's like, I'm not going to go into Cincinnati. I don't need that. I'm going to own the towns outside of Cincinnati. Make it local, and that is such an easy thing to build affinity for. I love, like, I'm in a little town outside of Seattle. I could be all about promoting that little town, and everyone in that little town would think I'm amazing. Now, my audience happens to be all around the US, so this doesn't work for me. But for most of you, just go local. Support the local businesses. Do things like we've got the holiday season coming up. Don't buy from Amazon. Buy from this little chocolate shop, or buy from that. Or don't use 1-800-Flowers. Call the florist directly, right? You're looking out for the local businesses. Super easy. If you do this, if you do what I just talked about and build affinity for who you are as a person who happens to have a law degree, you flip the script. And it is impossible, maybe not impossible, it's very hard for someone to come in. I always use Morgan & Morgan because I like to kick them around a bit. But it's hard for Morgan & Morgan to come in and take that over because people like you. And you've spent a long time actually creating that affinity. That is a very, very amazing, unassailable competitive advantage. And finally, by the way, I'm an SEO at heart. Like I started 2006, like I ran SEO for a long time. Like that is what I personally really, really love. The reason I got into this dark social stuff is because what we know is that links from local businesses help you dominate the local pack. And there's all sorts of other things on this that make it actually work. But the localized links are the hard part. It's really, really hard to get localized links, but when you do it, you win. So this is how I got into this. You start profiling local businesses, you start supporting local businesses, you start showing up on local TV. The more local you get, the more local links that you get. And the more local links that you get, the more you win in local SEO. And increasingly in organic SEO. So this is an SEO play as well. These things work together, and it's amazing when they do. Okay? So this is the reason I got into this is I was like, how can we generate more localized links? Okay, I'm going to put up a couple of resource slides. I think you can get these slides if you want. If you can't, you can find me and I'll send them to you. But if you want to read more about this is fine. Lunch Hour Legal Marketing did a whole podcast, a whole episode on dark social. There's a lot of stuff out there. Morris, follow this dude. Just get inspiration. Follow this guy. Remember this? So remember that he did that thing with the 3 coaches, right? This has nothing to do with legal. This has to do with kids' sports, okay? There's no call to action. If you happen to be a parent of a kid who plays college football and you were in a car accident, please call Morris Lilienthal, right? Like, it doesn't exist. That's not what he's doing this for, okay? He's repurposed that content into multiple formats, and he's really pushing the local. Here, check these guys out, right? James, Lewis, Brian, Gossett, the Compound 2, like, he's tagging them so they support the message. More and more people are listening to this because he's leaning into his guests who have a local presence. Okay? The other thing with this, this is missed often, this is not a big number game. You don't have to have 50,000 followers or 100,000 followers. Hodges, and I use him as an example all the time, he doesn't have a ton of followers at an absolute number. And by the way, if you go, I can buy you. You guys want 100,000 followers? Come find me. Give me $10 and you're gonna have 100,000 followers tomorrow. What happens when you fake that is the algorithms learn that 100,000 of your followers don't care about your content, right? And so they stop promoting it to the people who do. So don't do that. This is not about volume. Sorry, that was an aside that I didn't want to lose. Get the tech right. Get the audio right when you're doing video. The new iPhone 14, the new iPhone 15 is amazing, but like get good audio because it does make a difference. Spend the $300 on good audio. It's important. If you want to follow some lawyers who are killing it, these are my favorites. They're not the only ones. John Morgan is doing a great job with this, guys, by the way. Ruki Tajani, like these people are so good. And you don't even need to listen to Conrad. Just go follow these guys and you will get inspiration for yourself. These guys are amazing. Okay, if you really want to go deep and nerdy, this dude is named Chris Walker. He works in the SaaS world. Everything that I've just shared with you, frankly, I've stolen from him and applied to the legal industry. So if you want to go super deep on dark social, go listen to Refine Labs, Chris Walker. He will blow your mind. He blows my mind all the time. And that's it. That is my whole point. This is the way and kind of this methodology for taking your community engagement and getting really deeply involved in your community and amplifying that. If you just show up at the turkey trot with your logo, with 27 other companies on the back of the freebie giveaway shirt, you're missing the point, right? What you want to do when you do the turkey trot is we're going to interview the poor lady whose job it was to organize the turkey trot. We're going to take a video of the finish line during the turkey trot. We're going to interview the winners, right? And we're going to also talk to the charity that the turkey trot is supporting. Okay, now the turkey trot loves you, right? Because you're doing their marketing for them and they will do it back to you, okay? So this is how to turn your city into a referral source that really loves who you are, and you can flip the script on I hate lawyers to I like this lawyer. We are at time, but I will answer questions if you want. Is that correct? We good? No, we're done. You can't talk to me anymore. I have nothing else to share. Go enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.